Now, Odin had no intention of quite keeping his word. He wasn't that sort of god. And so, while the Thanes, the Fae, who, for all their glamour and all their beauty, valued truth beyond all things, sent their three most glorious. Nord, the lord of all waters. Frey and Freya, gods of beauty and of youth and of spring. Odin thought to himself, well, why don't we just send Hun? I mean, they value strength in arms and honesty. They don't seem to value intelligence. They won't mind. I'll send him and a couple of Valkyrie. And the Vanir will think they're just wonderful. They'll look at the Valkyrie and they'll say, oh, they're already Vanir. It will be fine. But Mimir shook his head and said, well, if you're going to do that, I must go. I must go with them, because Hun is stupid. They'll soon know that we have sent them a canard. I must go. And Odin rubbed his head and said, but then I'll lose the power to know what is in the hearts of all living things. For you grow at the roots of the world. And Mimir said, so be it. And rode off before Odin could stop him with the others. Well, Odin soon discovered in Njord a very great friend. They would stand together up by the Holy One tree and talk and talk and talk. For Njord, as masters of the waters of the world, knew a lot of the ways, a lot of the things that lie at the roots of things. He was like his old friend Mimir. And unlike Mimir, he was more game for trying to spy on the Norns and find out what they were doing and how much fate they had, although they never quite could do it. For far off in the east, fate was being settled. There Hun and Mimir had settled in, and it seemed for a while to the Vanes that they had got a great warrior and a wise warrior. It was true, he always brought that dirty, smelly servant with him, the one who seemed to age, whose very mortality stank their counsels out. And he seemed to defer and ask him, always in that strange, quiet, guttural language that they had, questions. But Hun's counsel was always true and always good, always wise. He knew what was what. And as the years passed, and he led them in many a skirmish, brave as he was, beautiful as he was, he became more and more popular. And the Vanes grew more and more anxious that he was followed by this strange, ugly creature, who as the years grew older and more deformed. Until at last, coming together, they decided, we cannot allow such an ugly creature in our councils. We can have Hun, certainly, but not that creature. And so they sent Mimir off to look at the western wall of their kingdom, to check that the lands with the Aesir were fine and were well tended to. This was a simple menial task, as befitted a simple menial creature like Mimir. And they invited Hun to a great war council, for it was true, they had discovered the line to the east of them. There was the land of the great Kraken itself, all twisting tentacles and fierce flowing folly. And so it was in a great council, the gods, the Vane, said, we must decide what to do. And some said for war and some said for peace. But by and large, more were for war than peace. Now, if Mimir had been there, with his wisdom he might have known that the Kraken is immortal, that all the power of the Vanes could not defeat it. But he was not there. He was measuring the border of the lands with the other god, with the Aesir. And so it was, when it became Hun's turn, he just said, well, I'll agree with what the rest of you say. I'll lead you, and I'll do my bit, but yes, I'll agree. And so it was. The Vanes marched off to war. Now, that was a war like no other. For Kraken, every time you cut off their tentacle, 7 more come, and more of the best and the greatest of Vanes had their throats clutched and the heads rendered asunder. As more and more Krakens, it seemed to assail them, and only Hun with fire and blade seemed to be immune, and fight, and many a life he saved, and many a great deed of courage, before the Vane had to sound the retreat. And they went then back to a hall on the eastern end of their kingdom, and they said, what shall we do now? Hun didn't know. He said, I'll do what the rest do. Now the Vanes were furious, and they were about to settle to go to war, or at least to hold their land, and not flee back to their west, when suddenly that fort was beset by tentacles. The great Kraken itself had come. And the Kraken's tentacles started to constrict the fort, and Thrun did not know what to do. He fought and hacked and hacked and fought and hacked and fought, but he had no power and no charm, and it seemed the greatest of the Vane would be killed there. But just at that moment, in the guise of some eagle, Mimir flight down, and he flew down, and as he flew down, he issued such a charm that the Vanes rose up like dragons and flew off far to the west, to their own lands and their own halls. Bouching though before they went in great gobbets, flame, burning the Kraken's back. Now, once this was done, it was clear that Thrun was an idiot, but a valuable one. But the Vane were furious. They knew it could not be Hune's idea, that he would be sent but a fool. And they raged at Odin, that Odin had tricked them. And then they looked with hate at Mimir. Now Mimir had been worn out by this charm, for although he, like Odin, was a shapeshifter, he could not change that often. And now he was old and wizened beyond time, it seemed to them. It will be a service, and it will be some Slav. He might have saved us now, but it was only because of his folly that we were condemned. For they seemed to blame Mimir for Thrun's folly. And in their heart of hearts, they knew that if Mimir had been with them, they would not ever have assailed the Kraken. But such is the caprices of gods and men and elves, that they blame the wise and cherish the stupid. And so it was, they decided that Mimir, old and wizened as he must bear the sin. And they took him out and hewed off his head and put out his eyes so that he could see nothing in death. But Hune said, "Take those eyes and put them on your shields, for they will be as wisdom for you." And actually that is what the Vanes did. To that day the Vanes have eyes upon their shields, and the eyes look out in wisdom. But they sent the head back to Odin. Now Odin was furious, absolutely furious. And his friend Njord came before him and said, "Well, they have killed Mimir, who was your friend. I must offer my life in sacrifice." And he pulled back his head and offered it. And Odin said, "No! I've lost one friend. I will not lose another." And Njord looked at him and smiled and said, "Perhaps you've learned more wisdom." And then he lay his hand upon Mimir and put his fingers where the eyes once were, and he said, "I see something. As water knows life, take this head. If you put it on that branch that you once knocked down, with Mimir at your side, on the high yew tree, it might live again." And the pair of them then went up to the high yew tree, and on that broken branch they put the head, and it seemed to move and to live, but it looked always inside and could say very little. "Well, what should I do?" said Odin. And Njord, laying his hand upon the head, said, "He seems to say to me in the whispers of water that he cannot speak without seeing, and he cannot see without an eye. But if he has an eye, he will see into the roots of the tree. He will see something of the future of gods and men and elves." And Odin, without thinking what he was doing, took out a dagger and plucked out his left eye and put it in the socket of the eye of his friend. And it opened and looked inward, and this voice spoke, "Odin, Odin, as life sees life, and I was mortal in the end, I see now the future." And Odin cried, and as he cried, he looked up. And just then, for the very first time, when he was not looking for it, he saw the skeins of fate, the fate the Norns had with them, starting to weave. And there were many skeins, some beautiful and gold and white and glorious, some blue, some twisting colours, but many more black than he fancied, and far fewer than he could dream. And the Norns were weaving his fate, the fate of gods and men and elves.